And now the director of Sunseed The Journey and today's host, Amartat Cohn.
Today, we're really honored to have with us as our guest Philip Goldberg. He's a prolific author, a lecturer, meditation teacher, and guide through the troubled waters of our time.
We're just setting ourselves up so that grace can enter. You cannot know the state of consciousness of another human being. Is it permanent? How long does it have to go on before you say, well, you could slip out of it again? Development as human beings is not in lockstep with the inner experiences of growing toward or falling into a state of enlightenment. And the world needs spiritual wisdom.
Philip Goldberg, welcome, and thank you for joining us on our Wisdom Talks.
Oh, I am honored to be with you, and I thank you for the kind introduction.
Can you please share with us a little bit about your journey, at least one little segment of your journey? Let's say you, at least what I read, you started as a Marxist, atheist, political activist.
Yeah.
And then in graduate school, you dropped out to become you were probably already a serious seeker, but you dropped out so that you could further your exploration of the inner and spiritual world.
Yeah, it was the 60s, and I was a product of that era. And you're right, I was a anti-religious. I had no interest in anything spiritual. I was trying to change the world through political activism as a student, and to end war and all the rest of the activities. But my personal life was a bit of a mess, and I didn't know how to live in the world or to what was important. And I had big questions that no one could answer. And my seeking, like a lot of other people, led me to the spiritual teachings of the East. And that was life-changing. But the teachings from the East had a pragmatic and empirical basis, to my surprise. And that's how they were presented to me, as kind of a science of consciousness. And as an anti-authority kind of rebellious kid, I was not interested in anybody telling me what I have to believe in. And the teachers from the East didn't say you have to believe in me or believe what I'm teaching you. They said, try this out. And so I tried a number of things. I read everything I could. That led me directly to certain texts like the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads. And I found them profoundly true and profoundly transformative in practice. And my life changed. And so I wanted more and more and more. And where that led me was to become a teacher of transcendental meditation. That method worked for me. It was in the days and months following the Beatles taking up the practice and going to India.
What was the promise that you had hoped for would be the outcome of your initiation into TM?
There were two things, and I was very clear on this from the beginning. I understood that there would be, to taking up a practice like a deep meditation practice, there would be immediate results. That was the promise, that there would be some increased calm, some clearer mind, expanded consciousness, and some inner peace. And I wanted that. I needed it. And because I was filled with anxiety and all the rest of the symptoms, and I was doing destructive things, smoking cigarettes and taking drugs that were initially mind expanding, but had their downside. And I found that to be true. And, it was immediately effective. And that was encouraging. There were also the promises of long-term growth toward this, state of enlightenment or liberation that the texts, what we think of as Hindu and Buddhist texts, describe Taoist, the vision of the enlightened sage, the enlightened master, beyond suffering, and of impeccable wisdom and untouchable inner calm and equanimity. And I wanted that. It took me a while to realize that it wasn't going to happen in a short period of time, and I became content with any little sign of progress in that direction, and gave up having a goal of some end state, which I'm not sure exists for human beings. But growth in the directions that the traditions described was something I looked for, and my search or my experimentation continued. And I'm pleased to say, that after 50 years, oh, sure, I had visions that I'd be some great, enlightened sage by the time I was 45 years old or whatever. But, we all have our silly ideals. And then we learn that, my whole life has been about integrating what we think of as the spiritual life, the inner life, with the responsibilities and the joys and sorrows of what we loosely call real life.
What was Maharishi like?
At first, I was in total awe of him. He's this great being who, suddenly became world famous with the Beatles, and was like, the cover story guy that, on Life and Look magazines and all these things, for the kind of quintessential image of the guru. And I was in awe. And then in his presence, in his company, I found him always to be impeccably self-contained and cheerful. I mean, he was really funny. and he had that laugh that made him part of his his notoriety. They called him the giggling guru because he found things so amusing, and he'd be laughing all the time. At the same time, I saw him get angry. I saw him get tired. I saw him seem to be a little irritable because, he was human. And I saw him be disappointed in people, as I've discovered Yogananda was as well at times, but always kind and always understanding, always having the bigger picture, and extremely dedicated to their cause. And at the same time, I have to add this, in a certain way, incredibly humble. Yogananda, the other people I've looked into, less with less diligence, they always paid homage to their lineage, to their own gurus, to their gurus' gurus, to the long line of sages and saints on whose shoulders they stood. And I always appreciated that about him, and now, researching Yogananda as well. And there's a subtle thing that happens in their presence. There is something about the energy and that they emanate. There's an atmosphere of peace.
But at some point you left TM as a teacher.
Things changed, and I wanted to expand my horizons and not sort of just be exclusively associated with one set of teachings. I wanted to explore wider. I wanted to write, and I couldn't be a public writing in the public arena just as a representative of a particular spiritual lineage. So I pulled away from active participation, but for my personal practice, it has held up quite nicely.
Did you ever hop or levitate? That was at one point part of the
Well, it still is. To my knowledge, to this day, nobody is floating in the air, levitating, or walking through walls. There is, however, in the texts describing these things, that talks about early stages of such abilities. And one of the early stages of what's described as levitation is, just sort of hopping around like a frog. And I've seen that. I've done that. But it's not what people might imagine it to be. But there was some value, and I assume there still is some value in practicing those methods, but it's not necessarily the achievement of the powers themselves, if you know what I mean.
Of course, I mean, when you read the stories about Ramakrishna and if you read Autobiography of a Yogi, the stories of the people that Yogananda met, and when he was young, he would go from teacher to teacher, and people that could apparently be in two places at once, that could read your mind about things that nobody else could know except you, right? And we have the same stories that go with Nimkaroli Baba, with Ram Dass's guru. But then there's always this skepticism, at least that I have. Why don't we see people like this today, when we can actually measure them and see them and put them on social media and television? Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's perfectly, it's natural, and to me commendable that people would be skeptical about such things. How could you not be? I've taught courses going through Autobiography of a Yogi. And, I've dealt with the book many times over the years, and I still go, did that really happen? Because, I'm a kid from Brooklyn. You don't just accept everything. Or maybe he was misguided. Maybe he thought he saw that, or maybe he just heard that and it's not really true. Who knows? All of these things are plausible to me. I go along with all the great teachers, including Buddha. Buddha was once asked, do you perform miracles? And he said, yes. When I'm hungry, I eat. When I'm thirsty, I drink. That's a miracle. And they all say, sure, these things are possible. And many people like Yogananda and others have witnessed them. In the, rare yogis, these advanced, yogis, or, just gifted saints and sages. But are they going to happen for the average yoga practitioner or Buddhist meditator living in New York or LA or wherever? Some little taste of it maybe, but all the great teachers have always said it's good to know about these things because they teach you about what is possible. And they offer a window into the true nature of consciousness and the power of the mind. But don't get caught up in it. Yeah, these things are possible. Yeah, these things are true. Yeah, these things happen. Now go sweep the floor.
Let's talk a little bit about enlightenment, if we may.
There's a lot of reassessment that has been going on in spiritual circles over the last 10, 20 years or more, thinking, well, what does it really mean? what were the assumptions we made about it that may or may not be true? What might have been true in traditional cultural context from which these teachings came that may or may not be true now for us in the Western world? What did we in our ignorance project onto the teachings of enlightenment in order to feed our own aspirations or our own wishful thinking or whatever? And so I think there's been a lot of assessment and a lot of good, hard research on the subject that we can learn from. To me, what enlightenment always stood for is a state of being, a state of consciousness in which the individual, this personality housed in a body that's called Phil and, has a certain personality, discovers and awakens to one's true nature, which is beyond Philness, which is beyond the body, and is not, as Walt Whitman put it, not contained between his hat and his boots. That is infinite and eternal, beyond change, beyond the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, and partakes of infinity. That is divine, that spark of divinity that we all have within us, that all the mystical teachings talk about. Awakening to that in a permanent way, as opposed to a temporary glimpse, and living it, being it, even while engaged in, talking on a podcast and driving the car and being a husband or dad or whatever. That is the state that is described in the text and called enlightenment or called self-realization. And I have no reason to think it is not a possibility. Enough people historically have entered that state, and a great number of people in our time presumably have, according to their own self-descriptions. Whether it's an end state or whether human evolution and growth, development continues after the achievement of that state of enlightenment, that's the question that many people have begun to ask. And part of the reason for that was it had always been assumed that with the attainment or the, slipping into this state described as enlightenment, one would become some kind of perfect human being who's impeccably moral and impeccably ethical, whose behavior is always right behavior, and has, infinite compassion and love. That seems to be an erroneous assumption, that there are different lines of development, as Ken Wilber described, and I think with great insight, so that our development as human beings is not in lockstep with the inner experiences of growing toward or falling into a state of enlightenment. Plus, once one has this state of being, I don't want to call it an experience, because experience sounds temporary, but one is in such a state. Is it permanent? How long does it have to go on before you say, well, you could slip out of it again? I think, and many people have slipped into these states and said, "Oh, this must be enlightenment. I've achieved it." And next thing you know,
And
they've lost it.
that was one of my other questions. Is it really a permanent state, or is it something that people can touch? I mean, in our little ways of meditating, I'm speaking of myself, there are moments when you're no longer there, let's say,
Right.
or you're something else. But I wouldn't call that enlightenment.
No.
But,
And nor
yeah.
would the sages, because
Right.
by definition, that state is permanent. But the temporary states, the glimpses, and then the permanent state has levels within that. There's this transcendent dimension, but then there's the human dimension. Even the great sages, even Buddha, even Christ, even Shankara and Ramakrishna and all these great enlightened beings, they still had bodies. They were still functioning in the world. And so, they had to go to the bathroom, and they had to eat, and they had to sleep. And, presumably they, their minds and emotions had different states of fluctuation, fluctuating levels of, happiness or anger or whatever, because they remain human. The characteristic of enlightenment would be they were, while being human, witnessing all that stuff from a state of consciousness that is always aware of the infinite nature. So when I did my biography of Yogananda, his most ardent disciples always portray him as some perfect human being, but he was human. And he worried about money and, paying the bills at the ashram and, the lawsuits and, all the rest of the stuff that he had to deal with. And he had a body, and his body, had ailments. And I like the humanness of these people. To me, it makes them even greater than if we sort of imagine them to be somehow beyond, the stuff of human life.
Well, you've interviewed hundreds of people on your podcasts. By the way, I really recommend people to look up Spirit Matters, Conversations on Contemporary Spirituality. Of all the people you've met and interviewed, would you call any of them enlightened beings? And how would you be able to know? It said, can you ever understand the level of somebody who's higher than yours? I don't know.
That I'm going to answer the second question first, because you anticipated my answer to the first question, which is, I don't think one can we like to make assumptions. We like to think, oh, that person. I don't think it's possible to know the inner state of another human being, at least from my ordinary level of consciousness. I took that to be axiomatic. In fact, when I was spending all that time with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi back in the early 70s, he said that on many occasions. You cannot know the state of consciousness of another human being by their outer behavior or their actions. In a certain way, you can. If somebody acts with equanimity and compassion and kindness and love, you can make certain assumptions about their inner state. They must have a certain level of inner peace and stability and so forth to be able to behave that way on a consistent basis. But there's a lot of very nice people and good people who aren't necessarily, engaged in a spiritual life, or have any inner state of sublime, infinite consciousness. They're just nice people. They were raised well, whatever goes into being a nice person. So you can't necessarily assume that much. And there are many people who have very little charisma, and they wouldn't necessarily attract your attention as something special. But you don't, for all you know, they're just walking with God at every moment. We can't really tell. So I make no assumptions about these, level of enlightenment anybody may or may not have attained. I just, that's beyond my pay grade. I could just say someone was interesting, someone was nice, someone was, had a lot to offer, but I'll let them, decide whether they have achieved any particular state.
Until recently, I never really thought about or didn't even understand dualism or non-dualism. When I began to understand the non-dualism of Buddhism and Vedanta, it sort of made a lot of sense to me. But I still come back to, well, but where is God in these different faiths? And so you said in your great book, Spiritual Practices for Crazy Times, convert your feelings into questions and humbly present them, and then wait and listen. Okay. Well, I'm waiting. I've been listening now for 79 years.
But maybe that's the answer. We're always waiting.
What do we do to get an answer to, people have gone and prostrated themselves on knives to try to get those answers, right? So
yeah,
it's not.
I always come back to Rilke, the great German poet, who I forget the second line, but it's something about living the questions, as opposed to groping for answers. It's just living the questions is sufficient. And some things I think are just mysteries that are beyond the comprehension of us mere mortals. But around the question of duality and non-duality, I think there's now that non-duality has entered the vocabulary of so many people, the non-dual traditions, Advaita Vedanta being the sort of quintessential non-dual teaching. By definition, it means non-dual. Most of the teachers we're familiar with were non-dualists. They talked about oneness. Yoga is a non-dual teaching. Certain forms of Buddhism are non-dual teachings. They recognize the oneness that of all things, the essential unity that there is on the most fundamental level. There is no separation between one form of one of the forms we see, one of the forms we think we are, from any other form. It's all oneness and unity. It is all, as they say in Sanskrit, it is all Brahman, all the essential ground of being. That said, it doesn't mean there's no duality, and there's some, certain naivete or erroneous assumption that non-dualism means there's that what we perceive of as the world of forms and change and substance and separation doesn't really exist. Of course it exists. I'm speaking to you. We're one, but the duality is also true. And the great non-dual teachers Adi Shankaracharya, Ramana Maharshi, all these, the great non-dualists, Buddha himself, they understood that there was a transcendent reality that is beyond form, that is beyond separation. But within that is the world of form and the world of separation. Otherwise, you couldn't drive on the right side of the road. You know, there's both exists. The transcendent includes the immanent. The non-dual includes the dual. And it's that coexistence. Duality is not contradicted by non-duality. It's enfolded within it. And so the great non-dual teachers like Shankara, this is a discovery that I came across a number of years ago. Shankara is considered, the great non-dualist. Everything is one. Everything is one. The world of form and substance and change is Maya. It's an illusion. That people took that to mean it's not real. No, by illusion, it's meant that it's not just what you think it is. There's more to it. And what's more to it is the underlying unity. Shankara composed hymns, what we call hymns, sacred poems and songs to the Divine Mother, to the various forms of God that are depicted in the Hindu scriptures. And there was a poem by Shankara, or a song by Shankara, in which he essentially says, it's an homage to the divine feminine. And he says, "Oh, Mother, you know and I know that there's no separation between us, that we are one. But permit me to think of you as separate from me so I can love you, so I can worship you. I know it's not real that we're just really one, but I want to worship you. I want to sing your praises. So allow me this." And that's the spirit of, like, yes, there's the beyond form, the transcendent, but what we think of as God, or or deity, or a particular form that the divine takes, that we favor. What's called in Sanskrit the Ishta Devata, your preferred form of the divine. That too has its value and its reality, because we're human beings. And, it serves us to think of something apart from us that we could turn to and worship or ask questions of. Whether the answers come or not, that's a different issue, man. And maybe, sometimes, there's a lot of, sacred, holy tradition stories that are sort of speak to that, and they say, well, what do you think is going to happen? What are you looking for in an answer? Maybe the answer has come and you didn't recognize it. It's that famous story of the guy in the boat, and the boat, it's a stormy at sea, and he keeps saying, "God save me, God save me." And a helicopter comes and he says, "No, I don't need you. I'm waiting for God to save me." And a rowboat and he keeps turning people away. And finally, God says to him, "Well, yeah, I sent you a rowboat. I sent you a helicopter. I did, that was your answer. What are you waiting for?" And so we don't always recognize it.
And there's also the idea that we actually are, at this moment, capable of having the all within and without.
Yeah, we are already divine. And all the spiritual teachings are about removing the obstacles to seeing what actually exists, the equivalent of, lifting the window shades to let the light in, or cleaning the lampshade so the light shines. So we do them. We do what we can. Someone once said, it was a Zen master, said, enlightenment is an accident and meditation makes you accident prone. And you could say the same of all the other kind of methods. We're just setting ourselves up so that grace can enter. And that could happen at any time for any of us. And I'm guessing you and so many of your listeners and viewers have had glimpses of it. It's what keeps us going. You have tastes of the transcendent. You have tastes of the inner bliss that comes from these experiences, and it keeps us going. And sometimes when the taste is vivid and clear, and then it's gone, you want it so desperately, you can slip into what has been called the dark night of the soul. It's like, I lost it. I thought I had it. I got a glimpse of it. I want it. I want more. I want more. People write love stories about the girl or a guy who got away. Oh, I had true love and I let it go. Well, we have the same thing sometimes with the divine. It's like, oh my God, I had that glimpse during that retreat. I had that sense of oneness when I was walking in the woods or whatever it is. And I want more of that. I want more of it. And so that can make us, frustrated and anxious. On the other hand, it's what keeps us going, and we know it's possible, and we just want more of it. So we do what we do and follow the path that's right for us. And at a certain point, at least for some of us, you say, you know what? I'm giving up the desperate element to this, and I'm just going to enjoy whatever I have at the moment. And, if more comes, it'll come.
Well, thank you for that. That really, I hope some of the people listening will get it. I definitely got it. And we just keep going, we keep finding those little, why do we go back and go to the same restaurant again? I mean, that's maybe not a good analogy, but we had proof before. We're going to go back.
That's right.
And try to eat, the next one. But you put a lot of things out in your book, by the way. Thank you for that book. This is the book I have right here in my hand, Spiritual Practice for Crazy Times. I mean, I think we've always been in crazy times.
Yeah, I agree. There's never been a time that's not crazy, but sometimes are crazier than others.
But there's so much in here. So, that comes to the question, I guess, is how important is it, in your opinion, well, from what you've seen, for people who are wanting to touch the divine, or in the terms of Vedanta, to find the goal is to find God consciousness in yourself and everywhere. How important is it for people to follow a tradition rather than to there's many things coming out now that maybe aren't part of a tradition, or to actually search for a teacher?
Yeah, and boy, that's a complex question, and one that's obviously first and front and center in so many people's lives. And I think there's no one size fits all answer to this. That people say, oh, the age of gurus is over. You don't need gurus. Oh, you just be on your own, be independent. And you mentioned Siddhartha before. That was a big part of that book. He meets the Buddha, but he says, you know what? I don't want to be part of that community. I just have to pursue my own way, which is fascinating, because most people would kill to be, spend time with the Buddha and be a close disciple of that. And for some people, that would be right. I saw that around, Maharishi. I've read, I discovered around all the other teachers. There are people who are cut out to be devotees, to be disciples, and it works for them to have an exclusive commitment to a teacher or an organization, at least for a significant segment of their lives. That may change. And that's very common to, somebody, who's been a disciple for 20 years or whatever. And then the teacher says, you should move on now. It's time, graduate, go on your own, do something else. Or some people are lifers, and some people have a resistance to that kind of commitment and that kind of exclusive affiliation. And they want to, spread their wings and learn from a variety of sources. All of it is valid. The one thing I would say is, in this day and age, when we have access to so many different teachings so easily, it's very tempting to remain a hardcore independent. And that's where to me, I think we're all independents, because everybody's path is different. But you have to be true to what you need and what your path is at every moment. And sometimes that may mean sticking with one thing for a while and going deep. It's the depth that matters. Ramakrishna, even in his day, in the 19th century, long before the internet and easy access to every spiritual teaching imaginable, he talked about people who go from one teaching to another, to people who are digging for water and just keep digging holes, but never go deep enough into any one of them to get to the water. And that we can make that mistake now in what's called cafeteria, sort of buffet style religion. You can have all the variety and all the good tasting stuff and never go get the nutrition you need. So sometimes, sticking with something for at least for a while gives you a different experience and a depth that you couldn't do if you just sort of were spiritually promiscuous all the time. So, with that in mind, that depth matters. And sometimes consistency over time matters, so you can give something the attention it requires before you decide whether it's useful for you. I think the age we're living in, where exploration is so possible and so readily accessible, is a tremendous blessing. But it requires discernment and care.
I think we're both dedicated to saving the world in different ways, right? And that we have a duty, a dharma. The dharma word really resonates to me, because
me too.
I don't have any choice, in a way. To, you wrote in your book, once our individual flames are lit from within, it's imperative that we shine them somewhere, how dim or ever inconsistent that might be. And one of the questions I'm sure you've asked, I ask, is how can we get this message of whatever people can do to get closer to their own unity, so we don't create so much destruction in the world? What can we do to get this message to people who are not on the path, who and especially to decision makers who run our policy in society?
I find it difficult to come to terms with how old I actually am. But at a certain point, I realized, you know what, Phil, you're an elder now. You have something to offer. You've learned a lot. And I get that, reluctantly. I've gotten that from people who read my books or hear my talks and say something nice about it. And after a while, I realized, I have learned a lot. And I can be humble about that, because I still have so much to learn. But I have learned a lot, and I do have something to offer. And, in that sense, I'm an elder, and I should take that role seriously. And the world needs spiritual wisdom and citizens who take their responsibility to make the world a better place seriously, who also have a deep and profound inner life. I always admire social activists and people who dedicate themselves to making the world a better place, whether they're trying to solve climate change or inequality or various forms of bigotry and social justice issues and so forth. But so many of the activists, like I was in the 60s, and so many of my comrades were, don't have a rich inner life and don't have the spiritual dimension to bring to things. So their efforts, as important as they are and as dedicated as they are, don't have the depth and lasting effect that they might have. And similarly, the people working in the spiritual arena who think it's just enough to do that, and just by virtue of the fact that they meditate or they, are growing spiritually themselves is enough. I think if I'm to preach to the choir, it's to tell the choir that we also have to take seriously our dharma as members of a community, citizens of a nation, and earthlings on a planet. And if we can do something, anything, to contribute to making the world a better place and to solving some of the pressing problems of the world, even on a limited basis, even in just our neighborhood, I think we have that responsibility. And I can't tell people how to do it. I don't know quite how to do it. I just know I have a big mouth and I've learned some things, so I can speak and I can write. Those are my skills. So I do the best I can. But one of the things I've come to realize just in recent times is that there's so many people like you and me who feel this way. So there must be some opportunities for collective action and collective engagement. What form that will take, I don't know. I just know I'm in the market and I'm open to the possibilities of teaming up with other people who feel the same way and seeing what we could do. One of the things I've done is, I became a member of the board of a group called the Association for Spiritual Integrity. And we're trying to address the misbehavior of spiritual teachers and the harm that those people have done by acting unethically. And part of that is to get people to recognize that spiritual teachers, spiritual seekers, we also have a responsibility to bring that wisdom into the world as much as we can for the sake of making the world a better place. So I'm putting that out there and to you and everybody else that there's a lot of independent minded people in the spiritual, in the sort of contemporary spiritual world. But there's something to be said for teaming up. And it is a dark time and a dangerous time. I'm not only talking about climate change, but the specter of nuclear war is suddenly upon us again. And in various parts of the country, including shockingly the United States, the elements of autocracy and authoritarianism are rising, and that serves none of us. And those people in the spiritual communities who think they're above it and they'll be untouched. The spiritual teacher who everybody calls Amma,
Yes.
Amritanandamai, the hugging saint, so to speak. I quote her, I think, in my book, saying that if you're up on the rooftop and you see there's a fire on the ground floor, don't think, it doesn't affect me. You better get down there and help out, because sometimes those flames are going to rise up.
A couple more questions. Personally, are you still searching? And if so, what are you searching for?
Searching is such a central part of my life that there's no way I could stop. What I have stopped is any sense of urgency. So I'm just,
wow. Yeah.
I continue to learn. I continue to experiment. I continue to seek wisdom wherever I can find it, seeking new methods to add to my spiritual repertoire. Yes, that search for integrating the inner and the outer and the spiritual material, that never stops. And I just want to always remain curious.
Are there some younger people in their 20s and 30s that you've met or know about, people that you would call upcoming spiritual voices and spiritual teachers for the future generations?
I have met some incredible young people, and I'm impressed. They have a level of maturity that I don't think many of us had when we were that age. And I'm sure there are upcoming leaders. I don't know about people in their 20s, but I've met a number of people in their 30s and 40s who are spiritual activists who I think will make a contribution to the world. I don't want to name names, of course, but I'm encouraged by that. And I hope there's, a lot more of them than I realize.
I'm just curious if you have any final thoughts or messages that you feel is really important.
I will just repeat: established in yoga, perform action. And the complementary verse, which is to be true to your own dharma. Everybody's path is different. It requires discernment to know what's each step of the way is best for you. And by established in yoga, I don't mean, necessarily practicing the techniques that we think of as yoga, but to establish yourself in the unified consciousness of your divinity, and then perform responsibly in the world, and keep searching.
Now we're going to take a few minutes to change from the intellect to go to another part of ourself.
Well, everyone, I'm honored to be asked to lead you in a meditative practice. Why don't we do a form of mantra meditation, since we kind of talked about that? This is not meant to replace a traditional instruction or initiation into a meditative, a mantra meditation where people are assigned a personal mantra that's suitable for them. But we'll use a traditional Sanskrit phrase. And in the form of meditation that I favor, there's a distinction to be made between forms of concentration or focus and effortless, natural, non-effortful, non-focused meditation. So bear that in mind, and I'll lead us into it, and then we'll follow with some silent, and then a method for bringing some healing vibration to the world. So let's all close our eyes. Sit comfortably, keep your back straight, but without strain or effort, just comfortable, upright. And rest in the quiet. And allow any tension to dissolve. And notice when the eyes are closed and you allow the body to relax, the mind begins to quiet by itself without effort. And notice as well that thoughts, feelings, sensations continue to arise, and they come and they go. And there's a part of you, part of us, that witnesses the rise and fall of thought and feeling and sensation. That silent witness is what we truly are. That is the self with a capital S. That is awareness. That is consciousness. That is our true nature. And that true nature is eternal, infinite bliss. And in that quiet space, as we witness thought arising and falling, notice that with the slightest intention, you can introduce a thought or a sound of your choosing. In mantra meditation, that's what we do. We introduce the sound called a mantra. And one of the traditional sounds is so hum. So hum. So hum. So effortlessly introduce that sound within. Just allow it to enter the mind. Don't force anything. Don't manipulate anything. Don't try to sound it out in any particular rhythm. Just allow the sound with the slightest of intention to resonate within you and reverberate within you and take whatever form it may. And if it disappears, allow it to go and enjoy the silence. And when you feel like it, just with no effort, bring it back. And we'll continue that way with inner use of mantra for a few minutes. Now, ease off the use of mantra or anything intentional, and place your attention in the center of the chest, the area of the heart chakra or energy center. And imagine a radius of light, pure light, divine light in the center of the chest. And allow that light, which is filled with love, filled with compassion, filled with divine light, to expand from the chest down to the belly, down through the pelvic area, down through your thighs and your lower legs and your feet till it fills the lower half of your body. And then up from the center of the chest, expanding to the higher part of the chest, to the shoulders, to the arms and hands, and upward in the neck and the jaw and your entire face and your head, so that light fills your body and radiates outward. And offer that light, offer that pure love beyond your body to the community you're in, to the country you're in, and the continent you're in. And to all the other continents and the oceans and the planet which needs our healing. And outward even further to the solar system. To the Milky Way. To all the galaxies and all the clusters of galaxies in infinite space and the entire cosmos. That is the source of the light and the destination of the light. And that is you, and that is all of us and all sentient beings and all that is. And bring your awareness back to your body. And feel the weight of the body on your seat. And be here in the present moment, embodied, a spiritual being in a form. Renewed. And when you're ready and comfortable, open your eyes and bring that spiritual awareness into your life. Thank you for participating. Thank you, Amartat, for your wonderful questions and conversation. I appreciate it, and look forward to seeing the new movie.
Thank you, Phil, for this really wonderful exchange. I look forward to more. For our audience, just a reminder that this Wisdom Talk, like all of our Wisdom Talks, exist on our YouTube channel. They're soon going to turn them all into podcasts, which I haven't done yet. And they're also on our website. It's at sunseed.org/Wisdom Talks. And while you're there, take a look around on the website. We have some meditations. We have the movie Sunseed, The Journey. We have all sorts of new things coming out. So please subscribe to our mailing list. I look forward to many futures.
I hope so.
And God bless all of you as we say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Assalamu alaikum, shalom aleichem, namaste. May the long time sun seed shine upon you. Until the next time, bless you all.